Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the winner for the poll for today's video, at long last, is whether or not a no deal Brexit is even legal. Now, I'm super excited to do this video. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that a no deal Brexit remains the default position. Not only does Article 50 not provide a backstop for this, apparently, but the European Union Withdrawal Act passed by Parliament last year is cited as evidence that we must leave without a deal if we don't agree a deal in time. But although Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty is short and relatively easy to read and digest, the UK legislation is actually quite long, has a lot of caveats, a few of which I've only really just come across again when rereading it, prompted by an article by a professor of international law this week. Now, don't get me wrong, I still can't help but shake the feeling that it's likely that if the end date of Article 50 passes, whenever that now is, without agreement or without revoking Article 50, that we will somehow leave without a deal. It's not just that politicians throughout the EU, not just the UK, are behaving as if that's the fact. They all seem to have that assumption. But there are some intriguing things to point out, which means that at the very least, in the event of a no deal, the UK government will be taken to court by both nations. In fact, you might actually find that the EU get taken to court by nations, businesses, even just groups of citizens. And reading some of the finer details of the legislation, I have to say, I'm not a legal expert, but blimey, there's got to be a strong case that the government will lose these cases. However, like I said earlier this week, finding a person or a group guilty of committing a crime doesn't reverse the crime. You know, it could still be committed. It doesn't stop this happening, but it just holds someone responsible. So what are these grounds then? The first thing to note was the Miller case at the start of the process, which determined that Parliament must legislate for any specific change in the law in the UK. Leaving the EU is a change in the law, bloody big one. And this is what forced the Prime Minister to have to allow Parliament a vote on Brexit. She didn't want to. Trying to claim she could use royal prerogative, she could not. But they already did legislate, the Brexiteers cried. The European Union Withdrawal Act 2018 lays out our exit from the EU. Yes, it does. But prompted by this article, I did a bit more digging, and there are a few caveats. Now, let us have a look at this part of the European Union Withdrawal Act. 10. Continuation of North-South cooperation and the prevention of a new border arrangement, or of new border arrangement, 1. In exercising any of the powers under this Act, a Minister of the Crown or devolved authority must A. Act in a way that is compatible with the terms of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. That is what implemented the Good Friday Agreement. Now, I've tried to explain before in another video how putting a hard border there is not compatible with the Good Friday Agreement. The Prime Minister herself has completely accepted that, as have other ministers as well. But I don't need to argue about that again. Because the thing is, back in 1998, no one ever thought that we would put a hard border in Ireland again. That would be absolute madness. But more recently, well, we've thought about it. Look at 2 here. It says nothing in section 8, 9 or 23, 1 or 6 of this act authorises regulations which A. diminish any form of north-south cooperation provided for by the Belfast Agreement as defined by section 98 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998, or B. create or facilitate border arrangements between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland after exit date, which feature physical infrastructure, including border posts or checks and controls, that did not exist before exit day and are not in accordance with an agreement between the United Kingdom and the EU. We can't do it. We cannot do it. You know, it's not just that we can't put something physical there. Legally, we will have to. Legally, our no deal exit from the EU means that we have to. And that legislation prevents it. It's as simple as that. The Good Friday Agreement, although it didn't talk about hard borders, it did talk about arrangements that are only possible. You know, because these arrangements, we're talking about, there's groups active in Northern Ireland that need unhindered access that are formed of not just devolved organisations within Northern Ireland, therefore still part of the UK, but also the Republic of Ireland. But again, we don't need to go into that. The Withdrawal Act is super clear. You know, look at that paragraph. It's super clear. Well, I've taken it away now. It specifically prohibits physical infrastructure. And I can't believe I missed it. I knew the Good Friday Agreement prohibited a no deal, but that was sort of based on the fact that it's not compatible with the Good Friday Agreement. It's like, okay, this law sort of allows you to leave, but then we'd be breaking that law. But I failed to notice that our own act did so in terms so clear that even a Brexiteer could understand it. So leaving with no deal places a legal imperative on us for border arrangements. Indeed, that's what Brexiteers are specifically calling for. That's one of the things they say they wanted to leave for. Hard borders around the UK. The Act of Parliament last year completely prohibits it. Ergo, we're simply not allowed to leave with no deal, but Article 50 potentially boots us out. Or does it? The expert legal opinion, referred to as the Three Knights opinion, suggests that parliamentary sovereignty and the principle of legality require Parliament expressly to authorise withdrawal from the EU on the terms agreed with the EU, or to authorise withdrawal if no acceptable terms can be agreed. Now, that isn't an act of Parliament, but it's a judgment of senior legal experts as to the legal and constitutional situation. It would have to be tested in courts, of course, but it sort of partially already has. But if true, and remember, these are the sorts of people who would judge on such matters, then it means if we do crash out without a deal, a terrible crime has been committed. It is saying that for a no deal to happen, Parliament has to specifically, the word used is expressly, legislate for it. It isn't the default position after all. Parliament has not legislated for a no deal. There is nothing in the European Union Withdrawal Act that even talks about the potential for no deal. It assumes that we will have a deal and we will not leave until we do, even though there is a date in there. But that date is, of course, easily amendable. And now that I think about it, I haven't heard a single legal or constitutional expert say that a no deal is a default position. The media have said it is. And not just the Brexit supporting media, the media in general have said it is. Politicians have said it is, including in Europe. I have. But, I'm hardly an expert. But people who have intimate knowledge of these matters, the British Constitution, which is a fairly fluid thing, the British legal position, European law, no. I actually have looked and cannot find any that say, yeah, this is our legal default. So what was all that nonsense about, oh yes, we can totally withdraw from the backstop, it's totally fine? No, we knew we couldn't anyway. We knew that was a nonsense. Even the Attorney General, who was not an expert in international law, knew that that was a nonsense. But why were they even trying that? It's simply not possible. It is true that Article 50 seems to suggest that we just drop out after this period of time. That being said, it is at odds with the notion of ejecting a member of the EU against its will. So the reasoning may be summarised as follows. 1. The European Union Withdrawal Act specifically prevents us legally leaving the EU without a deal. 2. Top legal experts, in conjunction with the Miller case, have said that Parliament must legislate for a no-deal breakaway from the EU. This has been decided in the highest court in the land. Something that not only won't our politicians do, they've clearly made that, said last week, but they can't legally do it. 3, if the UK Parliament doesn't agree to a deal with the EU and refuses to legislate for a no-deal exit, then to be removed from the EU is actually against our will. 4, Article 50 states that a member state withdraws in accordance with its own constitutional arrangements. Well, as already noted by constitutional experts in a court of law, we haven't actually done that. The Withdrawal Act doesn't allow us to do so without some arrangements in Ireland to prevent physical infrastructure. 5, there are other treaties which prevent the EU ejecting a member state against its will. Like Article 7, for example, it can suspend a member, but it cannot eject a member against its will. Bloody hell, why is nobody talking about this in Parliament? The European Union Withdrawal Act doesn't legislate for the unconditional exit from the EU. Bottom line, there's no legislation forcing us out of the EU unless Parliament specifically legislates for it. What it's legislated for is an exit with an agreement with the EU. We do not have an agreement with the EU. So it hasn't legislated for any other form of exit. If Article 50 lapses and we don't have a deal, it lapses. We should actually, and this is what this professor is arguing, still be in the EU. We just find ourselves still in the EU with everyone looking around going, what the hell happened there? Don't know. Mind blown. So I've put a link to that article in the description below. I'm sure you'll be able to find the various acts, the bits of legislation, the European Union Withdrawal Act and the Lisbon Treaty yourselves. But yeah, share this around. Blimey. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, and click the bell notification as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.